You have to do your own
Unhelpful.
research about them before you talk to them. Absolutely spot on. And they're making 70% of the decision before they talk to a salesperson. So they do expect that salesperson to know their vertical, what their problems would be for somebody in their particular role.
This isn't your average revenue podcast. It's Ashley and Katrina's Infinite Revenue Playlist, powered by Comsor. And it's your new work bestie. Through conversations with other women in the revenue space, Ashley and Katrina get candid about their unique experiences, help women tackle challenges in the workplace, and uncover ways to grow as revenue pros. Maybe you'll learn a little, cry a little, laugh a little, have an epiphany, or at the very least, get a killer playlist to listen to while you work. Being a woman in this industry is wild. Let's talk about it.
Hello, I'm Ashley. Welcome to Ashley and Katrina's Infinite Revenue Playlist. Today, we're joined by Lori Harmon, Global Head of Business Development at Cloudflare. Lori, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, ladies, for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you. I'm going to do a quick bio so everybody knows who we're talking to today. If they haven't heard of you or aren't following you yet, Lori is an experienced sales leader. She specializes in helping customers maximize their returns. She drives sales innovation. She empowers teams. She's also the author of the book 42 Rules for Building a High Velocity Sales Team and a frequent speaker on topics related to all the things sales. Currently, she is VP and Global Head of Business Development at Cloudflare. Before that, she's worked at NetApp, BlackBerry, Contrast Security. I could keep going on, lots and lots of amazing high-tech companies. But the most important thing I think for us today is that Lori is very passionate about helping salespeople, especially women, realize their full potential, which is why we're so excited to have you today on our podcast.
Thanks again, Ashley.
So for those that have listened to previous episodes, we take a little bit of a musical twist to our podcast, and we actually ask each of our guests to pick their own walk-up song. So to explain the concept of a walk-up song, sometimes as sellers, we're often compared to athletes, and many athletes have their walk-up song as they walk out onto the field and they're ready to play, or in our case, before we walk into work and crush our day or close a deal. And the walk-up song is supposed to explain you as a professional or kind of relate to the topics at hand that we're going to talk about. So with that said, Lori, what is your walk-up song?
My walk-up song is I Won't Back Down by Tom Petty. And the reason that's my walk-up song, well, I think it's obvious, I won't back down. But what that's about is about doing the right thing. So I really believe it's the right thing to do. Now, within the context of is it right for the company? Is it right for the team? And is it right for the person, right? And those all three have to line up. Can't just be right for the person and not right for the company. As an example, then I really, really fight to get whatever that is, get it done, get it across the line, and just make sure that, we fulfill commitments and promises if that's what is surrounding that. But it's about doing the right thing, and it's hard to get me to back down.
I love it. And doing the right thing as a salesperson is an undervalued skill, in my opinion, because we know that customer success and the rest of the company hates nothing more than closing a customer who's a bad customer. So doing the right thing is important to remember.
Yeah, I agree. You have to do the right thing for your customers so that you keep them, but also to do the right thing for your buyer, get them to customers.
Absolutely. And so is there a specific lyric from the song that you resonate with, or is it more of the general overall theme and title of it?
It's more the general overall theme and title. And it has a good beat,
Which is awesome.
You can walk
It
in
does
with a
have
little
a
hustle to the song.
Classic.
Yeah, for sure. And it's got like some power behind it.
Exactly.
So
Power's
obviously, Laura,
important.
there's a million things we could ask you because you have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge on all things sales, as Ashley had mentioned. But specifically today, we really want to cover being a manager and managing other salespeople because we know a lot of our listeners are currently individual contributors and want to become managers, or maybe they're newly minted managers, and obviously there's lots to learn. So to kind of kick this conversation off, if you could give us a little bit of a rundown of your background and your managerial experience, I think our listeners would love that.
Okay, happy to do that. So I have to say, when I started working, I actually just wanted to be a manager. I didn't really want to go through being an individual contributor. Of course, you have to. You have to get the foundational experiences. Sometimes you have to go back and do those individual contributor roles again, or maybe, double duty as a manager. But I just felt like I just wanted to work with people, mentor and coach people, and actually delegate too. Nothing wrong with delegating. So I always wanted to be a manager. And fortunately, I was able to get there fairly early in my career. And I've just found that to be so rewarding and goes back to what I already stated, being able to help other people with their careers, mentor them, help them with their development plans, sponsor them, coach them. I really find that to be a critical part of management and really worthwhile to me. Now, you're always going to have people, you're going to have problem employees. And even that, it's always just been so much fun to work through that issue, have a candid conversation with somebody to try to get them over the hump. Or maybe together you discover that they're in the wrong role or the wrong company and you actually help them to get to where they're happy. Because at the end of the day, people should be happy. You should be happy. You're spending 80% of your life at work. Be happy and passionate about what you're doing. So I think as a manager, we can help people get there. And then, of course, we can also drive a lot of success for our companies. And if you're not driving success as a manager, well, you may not be there very long.
I think what you said about being happy is super key. And I think that is a concept that sometimes in sales specifically gets lost because it is a high pressure environment, right? We have quotas we have to hit. There's all these emails and things you need to sequence and send out and you need to build your pipeline. I think it's very easy to get lost in the numbers. But as a manager, yes, you want to incentivize your team to hit quota and you want to give them the resources, the tools that they need, and the coaching to get there. But I also think, again, that simple fact of making sure they're happy will in itself ensure that they're successful as well.
Agree with you.
I love that. I love that you talked about how you always knew you wanted to be in management. Do you have any advice for women out there, myself included, that would like to get to that leadership spot and don't really know how to get there?
Well, I think there's a few things on the how to. Absolutely. So one, if it's possible at your company, like for example, at Cloudflare, we do have templates where people can write up their development plan. But even if you don't, I mean, you could find something online. I mean, you can Google everything. You can probably get it from Chat GPT, right? You can find a development plan that you need to own it though and create it and then review it with your current manager. So they know like what you want to do. So first of all, know what you want to do. Yes, you may be deciding, but write down how you want to develop, which includes, what your passions are, where you want to go in your career. And sometimes that means going up. Sometimes that means going over. But then share it with your manager to make sure they know because they can't really support you if they don't know what you want to do. But
Yeah.
don't stop there. There are other key people in your company. Like, what is your list of people that you need to have really good relationships with in your particular company that will help you to advance in your career? So share it with them too, because what I find is you need to plant that seed and let it grow. So you might say today, hey, I want to be in management. Here's my development plan. Does this look good? Get them to, get their feedback. It still might take 6 months to a year. You don't know because you don't know how, what's happening with the economy, how fast the company's growing, when the next manager role might appear, and whether that's the right fit for you. It might be a different role. So you got to plant the seed and let it grow. And then they'll be like, oh, Ashley, oh, she would be great for this job. But if you never tell anybody, if you keep it to yourself, like, oh, I hope, you probably read the book. Hope is not a strategy. It's also not a strategy for sales. It's not a strategy for your career. You have to be vocal and tell people. So then they go, oh, Ashley would be great for this job. So you have to plant that seed.
It's really good advice.
Thank
So
you.
for someone that might be putting together a template for success, as you mentioned, for achieving a managerial role, are there any specific or concrete steps or skills or things you think they should do in order to plant that seed and say that they're ready for a sales management role specifically?
Sure. Well, I think, of course, in sales, you have to be delivering. You can't be like a bottom performer and then want to move up. So, number one, deliver on the business outcomes that are expected of you where you are today. The other thing is you have to be very organized because as a manager, you have to organize and you have to organize things in advance. Like you have to plan for, say, an all hands meeting or just a regular staff meeting. You have to have an agenda. So if you're not an organized person, I guess figure out how to be organized, but make sure you're organized to be a manager because there are so many things coming at you at the same time. You have to be able to prioritize and organize your time, or else you could, A, you might not get things done, but B, you could be working a lot of hours if you're not organized. So I think that's really important. And then if the role is open or there's a role, so say somebody's in a job that you want, figure out, look at them and like, what are they doing? What characteristics do they have that you may want to model or develop to move into a similar role or that same role? Maybe they'll move on and get promoted one day. So I think that's the other thing to look at. What's in the job description? What are the characteristics and skills of other peoples that have the job? And if somebody's in a role that you might want to have, do an informational interview. Talk to them. Ask them, like, what did they do to get there? Because everybody's going to have their own path. And you're going to get, I don't want to say conflicting advice, but you're going to get different advice. And then you do have to be able to kind of sort out which piece of advice are going to work for you and what you have the bandwidth to do and take on. And then the final thing I would say is if you have the ability, and I know how busy sales is and how we, have to make our numbers, but if there's like a special project or something you can add to what you're doing to get more visibility or more experience to kind of broaden your skill set, I really recommend that people do that.
I love all of those points that you shared. I think the last one in particular, I think an easy way of doing that is starting to build your own personal brand on LinkedIn, right? Social selling,
Mhm.
build that following, leverage it as additional network that helps you sell, etc. And then the second point you shared, which is the organization and prep, I think that one specifically is so important for any manager because as a manager myself, a relatively new one, I spend a lot of time on prep, specifically because I've had a lot of managers where I showed up to one-on-ones or weekly meetings and there was nothing on the agenda. We sat there for 30 minutes of silence going, "Oh, what's new? What's in your pipeline? What are you working on?" It was never really this like concrete, helpful meeting. And I always walked away feeling like it was kind of a waste of my time, or I had questions still that were unanswered because I was waiting for the manager to manage and give some
Mhm.
guidance. So I think for all those new managers out there, really taking the time to build those agendas before every one-on-one and every weekly meeting, team meeting, whatever it might be, is super critical.
Yeah, you'll actually add to
One
that.
thing
So say you're a manager, but then you want to be, say, a second line manager. You also have to prepare for the meetings with people more senior than you. So you show up, like you show up in a positive light. So more as a rep, prepare for the meeting with your manager, prepare for the meeting with, whomever could help you in your career. So it goes both ways, but I completely agree with those comments.
I was gonna ask if you have any suggestions on what those projects might look like if someone's trying to take on something to prove that they can do it or that they would like that upward growth. Do you have any examples in mind of things that people have done under you that they've been successful with?
Well, and it really does depend on your role exactly. But you could take on, even though if you're not an anointed leader or not even a team lead, because some companies have team lead roles, you can still become a leader in the organization and other people, your peers start to recognize you as, oh, let's talk to Ashley about this. Ashley knows how to do this. Oh, Ashley's great at that. So whether that's the best content that gets the most responses to an email, you're slaying people when you call them on the phone, and every time you talk to somebody, they convert into a deal or a meeting. I mean, there's so many things you can do, or, maybe your manager wants somebody to test something and
Mhm.
prove out the concept. And maybe you're the one who signs up and say, hey, I'll test that, or I'll do the UAT for a new Salesforce feature or a new tool that they're adding to our sales stack. So I think there's a lot of things. It is role dependent though, but a lot of
Yeah.
it is natural leadership. So people naturally look up to you just because of how you act and interact with your peers.
Yeah.
This discussion makes me think of a current SDR on my team who really is stepping up and becoming a lead. He's not a manager, and shout out Ben, you know who you are. He goes out of his way to mentor the other SDRs that are on the team. He shares all of his sequences that he builds by himself, and he'll share the success rates, the fail rates, etc. And says, "Oh, I suggest doing this." And all of the SDRs are naturally kind of looking to him now for advice on outreach, building their brand on LinkedIn. And it's true, right? The next time we need a manager, of course, we're going to look at Ben and say, he would be perfect, right? He's already stepping up to the plate and doing all those things without being asked that a manager would do.
That is a great example. Exactly what I'm talking about. He just became a natural leader because he's already jumping in to maybe be a buddy to somebody who's new or helping people to train to better use the systems to get better results. So great example.
100%. And I'm even having him help me evaluate tools right now. That's how much we rely
There you
on
go. Yep.
That's awesome. It's a
Sorry,
big
Ashley, I
job.
know I cut you off before. So
Oh, no, you're good. I actually, so this is a women in revenue podcast, right? Like we want to elevate women's voices. We want to talk about the experience that we have that's unique. And something that I'm going to be a little candid here that I've experienced is doing all of those things and becoming that natural leader, but still not getting picked up and I've been passed over for promotion by male coworkers who did not do those things. Is there any advice that you have, or have you experienced that at all yourself, Lori?
Well, I guess I would say I feel like generally I've been really lucky, but I know some very, very close friends who have definitely I'll just give you an example. I won't say any names, but one woman I know, she actually developed the job description for a new VP role, and she was actually already a VP.
Mhm.
She went through 7 interviews for that role, so it was inside the company. And then the person hiring pulled some guy into his office and had a 30-minute conversation, and the guy who was pulled into the office was a director, and that guy got the job. What's up with that? So in those situations, I really think you have to take a look at, where you are and what the culture is, because it's probably going to repeat itself, unfortunately, because that just may be the company culture. And I would say make sure you find a company that really has a culture that supports diversity, equality and inclusion, the DEI, acronym. But it's really important to be at the kind of place, because I actually saw that happen multiple times at the same place. And that's kind of also how I realized, well, this is not necessarily a place for me. I wasn't passed over, but I could have been if I'd stayed
Yeah.
too long.
I think situations like that are unfortunate because a lot of times it really is out of our hands. But that's also why I think podcasts like this, or the women in sales communities, or the meetups that we host monthly, are so important, because if we're able to open the door for each other or uplift each other, like eventually we're going to get that promotion. It's not fair, right? The fact that we have to try 10 times harder. But I think that that's a really important thing to point out, why Ashley and I originally connected, right? Because we were so frustrated at getting passed over for things that went to our male counterparts, and we only had each other to look to as the only one of, a few women on the sales team. And I think continuously having these conversations and being transparent about it, and pointing it out, is really important to actually get our foot in the door in the future.
And
Agreed.
I think, Lori, it's really awesome to have you on speaking about this, because sometimes we do have to have somebody tell us it's not you, and it's okay to remove yourself from a situation if it's banging your head against the wall. So
Yeah.
it's really great to hear that from you.
What is the definition of bang your head against the wall, right? It's crazy, right? So yet sometimes it's hard because maybe you really love your team or you like everything else about your environment. And it's unfortunate when those situations happen, but sometimes you really have to say, what is it, the entire company culture? Or maybe it's only one manager and you just need to get under a different manager at that company. That's another thing, is make a move under somebody else if that's an option. But you really have to look at those things. And it's a hard decision because, it's a lot of work to change.
I think that's why the topic of sponsorship has come up so often, especially among women in revenue communities, because a sponsor is someone that's going to vouch for you and actually get you in that door, as we've been talking about. And
Hmm.
mentors are great. Obviously, they help you on the day-to-day, the nitty-gritty stuff. But really finding a sponsor, someone that's in a leadership position, doesn't have to be a woman, it can be a man, doesn't matter, but someone that's going to be your ally and really vouch for you. I think finding that person early on is super important for every person in their career.
Totally agree. I was very, very lucky early in my career to have actually the man who was running global sales at the company I worked for. He actually picked me out and started mentoring. He just took me under his wing. He became a mentor and a sponsor, both. I didn't even know what that was back then. And it was amazing. He was probably the most notable mentor and sponsor I've ever had. So it is really critical. But now that it's much more of people talk about it more, it's much more known. I do encourage women to seek out either two people, a mentor and a sponsor, or sometimes people can be both. They can be a mentor and a sponsor in one person. But that really is not, it's not just women too. It's helpful for anybody in your career. But certainly if, since we might have been not given as many opportunities as others, it's especially important for women to seek out somebody. And you're right, it could be anybody, it could be a man, it could be a woman, as long as it's somebody who can help you. And what are they going to say when you're not in the room? Because you're not going to be in all those meetings if it's somebody up in a higher leadership level than you are. What are people going to say? Are they going to advocate for you? And are they going to give you opportunities in front of that leadership crowd to show your stuff so that other people will recognize your potential?
100%. The reason why I got my first enterprise AE role is because of a sponsor I had at a previous company. He was also my boss at the time. Shout out Stanton. He knows that I love him. He's the absolute best. He went to bat for me behind closed doors. I had no idea that he was talking me up and saying all these amazing things about me and saying that I'd be the perfect fit for an SDR to be promoted to an AE. And when the time came, I was the person that was considered because Stan had been vouching for me for a year. So again, I think like identifying a sponsor can be very difficult. Maybe they start off as a mentor, but finding that person in a leadership position that will speak for you behind those closed doors, as you said, Lori, again, is super important.
And it sounds like you didn't know, like you didn't really know it was happening, which I think is fine, early in your career. But now at this point, you can ask, hey, not only will you mentor me, but, are you willing to sponsor me? Or what do I need to do to prove to you that that I deserve to be sponsored? So I think you could be fairly direct with people.
100%. And going back to some questions about people that are currently in manager roles, what are some of the most common mistakes you see for new managers in sales manager roles? Tongue twister there.
Well, some of the things I see, and this may be slightly different for today's market because it's more important. So, the macroeconomic conditions have impacted the entire industry, both high tech and not high tech. And many of the people who are working, early in career, like SDRs or inside sales, they have never been through this kind of economic situation in their professional lives. So they don't necessarily realize that now more than ever, it requires discipline and accountability. So either the manager might be so young they don't realize it, or they just have never had to do it because, hey, things were just rolling in before and it was easier. They may not be good or strong at holding their team accountable and really implementing discipline that you need. Like you really have to be structured in today's market to get things across the line, right? And so I think that's one of the things I've seen in terms of mistakes. The other thing is, although empathy is important, maybe being too empathetic when people are not performing, you have to start them on a coaching plan, right? So they get coached, you can help them to see if you can get them to the right level of performance, which hopefully you can. That's always the hope. And if you can't, it is probably better for them and it's better for you and it's better for the company, speaking about doing the right thing, to help them transition to something else, whether that's another job at your company that maybe they're better suited for, or maybe transition out of the company. You really need to get them in the right place so that everybody can be successful. So those are probably the two biggest things I've seen. But then, you made a good example there, Katrina, not being prepared. Okay, you're about to have a one-on-one with somebody in your team. And yes, you can ask them to bring agenda items, which they should, but I always have a list of, okay, here's what I want to talk about too, right? Because it's got to be a give and take. So not being prepared or organized is another potential, downfall.
In all roles, I think organization is just so important. And like you mentioned, Lori, the world right now that we're in, that we're selling in, if we're in sales, is very difficult. And we can't afford to make stupid mistakes like not being prepared for a call or not being prepared to know what we're talking about with our products. And it's really important, I think, for all of us to be organized. If we're not, we're just going to fail.
Yep. And you know what? The buyer landscape, we all know, has changed too. They expect you to be prepared. They expect you to know what they need before you even talk to them.
Because they're doing all this research that we talked about this recently, Katrina and I did, about how they're doing all of the research before they even get to us. So for us to come in there and ask them, hey, what's your role, is just lazy.
Yeah,
and
you have to do your
and
own
helpful.
research about them before you talk to them. Absolutely spot on. And they're making 70% of the decision before they talk to a salesperson. So they do expect that salesperson to
Yeah.
know their vertical, what their problems would be for somebody in their particular role.
Lori, you said something I want to go back to real quick, which I thought was really interesting. You said, obviously, as a manager, you need to be empathetic, but there is that fine line where sometimes you're too empathetic, right? Maybe you let them get away with a little more than they should. That's definitely something that I struggle with, I think, as a manager, right? I sometimes am a little too empathetic. Or I'm like, oh, well, if I was in that position, of course they're struggling, right? But in sales, we got quotas to meet, right? We've got
Mhm.
all these, this pipeline that we need to fill. And I'm curious how you would handle tough conversations with someone that might be going through something and not kind of up to snuff with their work. Because I can imagine there's a lot of other managers that are scared to have those conversations.
Right. Well, then there's a lot of scenarios, right? I mean, there are things like, medical issues and things, that people have to go through or situations with their families. Obviously, they have to go through that and it may require them to take leave. If it's going to be an extended period of time, then you can help facilitate a conversation with HR. So maybe they need to take some kind of leave. And I think you need to be empathetic to those types of situations. But you're right. Sales has quotas and we all have to perform. So there's got to be a balance. And unless it's something very serious and, maybe extended where they do need to go on leave, you have to work with them. Like I said, if they aren't performing, I prefer to start with a coaching plan. So try to coach them. What is it they're not doing or they are doing incorrectly, right? That is preventing them from getting to their number. So help them to realize that. Coach them on, do they need to do better on calls? Well, you could do call coaching. Is it the content of their emails? You can A/B test that through something like Outreach or Sales Loft, which you mentioned earlier. I mean, there's so many ways to look at or figure out what they're doing and try to help them to tweak it. So I think the empathy is trying to help them to overcome any challenges so they can perform. But there's a point where after you do that, either if they'll step up, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. If they're not stepping up and even trying or doing like the baseline of activities and things they need to get done, I think it's pretty obvious you move them forward on a performance improvement plan. But at some point too, if you're coaching them and they just cannot, for whatever reason, they can't get it, they can't do it, they're probably in the wrong role. So then you need to still help them transition to something else. So you can't continue to hang on to people in sales for quarter after quarter after quarter if they're not performing. It just does not work. I mean, that's not how sales works. So, but for the conversation, you could be empathetic, but you also have to stick to the facts. The fact of the matter is your quota is X, you're performing at Y. Here's where I see, you could improve. Here's what I need you to do, say in the next week. Here, put in some really clear KPIs. So there's no fluffiness, right? You've got to be clear. Okay, here's what you need to do in the next week. Did they do it? Did they not? What do you need again? Here's what I need to do in the next week. Did they do it? Did they not? So if they're not progressing along those KPIs towards getting off the plan, you probably know that it's just lack of desire or it's not a good fit.
I think that's all very valid and very fair, right? If you put concrete numbers and checklists of things for them to do in front of them and they can't hit them, then it's not personal, right? It's hard to say it's not personal if someone's losing their job, but you do have concrete evidence to point to. So they can't just say, like, oh, this came out of nowhere, right? I didn't see this coming, which I think is what
Yeah, and that's
every
unfair. Like
manager
that would
wants
be
to point.
unempathetic. Or excuse me, that would be unempathetic to just surprise them. You really have to work with people. You also have to, there's legal issues. You have to obviously conform to those issues. You don't want to get anybody, crosswise that way. And part of the empathy is not surprising them. Every week when you talk to them, you're going to talk about some kind of performance and like how are they doing and give them guidance. Or if they, I don't know, let's say they yell at a customer or something, you're going to give them feedback. You're not going to wait 3 months to do that. You need to make it immediate so that people know where they stand. That's very important.
Also, I don't know if you guys noticed, my light went out when we were talking. I was like
Oh,
trying
I
to get it
didn't
to
Oh
go,
no.
It's
but
happened to me before. I did not
whatever.
notice.
No light for me. I'm moving towards the window.
Lori, you handle business development and you obviously are part of that world. We were just talking about like the data and knowing where people stand. What are your thoughts on software that helps with that? Because I sell a sales enablement tool. It's not really a business development tool, but I personally love that there are metrics that I can point to and say, yeah, I've been doing my job. I watched this training and I did this thing and I've been sending this piece of content out all these times. It's the same kind of concept with like a sales loft or an outreach where you can prove that you're putting in the effort. So long-winded way of asking you kind of what your take is on all of those tools and maybe if you have some favorites.
Well, I definitely think tools are important, but they don't, I mean, tools don't solve the problem necessarily. They do, or they can help people to be more productive. They can give them the insights like you were talking about. You can A B test everything on a sales engagement platform. But at the end of the day, the tool has to meet the business needs of the company. So just because I use tool X in my last company doesn't mean tool X would necessarily fit at Cloudflare. I mean, a lot of them are a little bit more generic, but you have to figure out what are the requirements of either BDR, inside, field, whatever kind of sales you're doing, customer success. What are the business requirements for the role that you're doing at company X? And then based on that, you can go, do your 70% pre-research before you talk to one of their sellers and, get down to a short list and then figure out which one is going to meet your needs. And as far as today, what we're using, we use Salesforce for our CRM. We did just move to Sales Loft for our sales engagement platform recently. They did happen
Interesting.
to be in the top of the Forrester quadrant. That's not the only reason, but they did have a lot of really good functionality. And for sellers, you have to have certain contact databases. There's usually you need more than one. So we have different
Yeah.
ones for different regions. And you also need things maybe specific to EMEA or specific to APAC, just because not one platform has every contact you need. LinkedIn Sales Navigator, Katrine mentioned social. Well, you need LinkedIn Sales Navigator to obviously build connections and things like that. And then I think after that, maybe you need video, maybe you don't. Maybe you need a product that helps you understand the revenue, or can your company just kind of pull that in automatically for you? I think you definitely need to figure out what's happening with generative AI and how are you going to use that? And, is it integrated in some of the tools you're buying? Are you going to do something separately? Do your company have a policy? I mean, that's going to be hugely, hugely, I think, positively impact for sales.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say, which I think is actually pretty unique. I talk to a lot of people who are like, I like this software and I implement it everywhere I go. And you're saying that you're thinking about it a lot more objectively and thinking about which tool fits which org. And I think that's really cool. I don't know if that's I don't know if I'm just talking to the wrong people, but I haven't heard somebody say that before. They're normally like, I like SalesLoft because this, and it doesn't really, they're not taking the company into account. So it's
Yeah, and
pretty
let's say I went to a
smart.
different company, which I don't want to do, but let's say I did. I would probably look at Sales Loft to see if it fits because, I'm a fan.
Yeah.
But if it wasn't a fit, I mean, you can't force fit something in, right?
Yeah.
Because what you find is you waste a lot of time of the resources that are doing the implementation, whether it's, your team plus IT and other resources. And then it's also pretty embarrassing to have it not work the way you need it to. And then
Yeah.
you have to swap it out. And that justification can be really, really even more difficult to do because you're like, wait, we just got this. This should be here for, it should run for like three to 5 years. You're going to have something that you continue to upgrade. So if you want to get rid of it in a year or two, again, it's more resource intensive. So you're kind of burning through cycles for your company. It's just not a good use of their time.
Lord, right now, is your team made up of SDRs, AEs, both? Like
Right now,
who
it's
are the
just
folks that you
BDRs
manage?
or SDRs. It's just SDRs. We have a really large team. We have
So,
like over 300 people.
oh
Wow.
wow. So I guess with managing 300 different BDRs, in what ways are you incentivizing them to hit quota right now? Different ways that other managers could kind of replicate it in their own organizations.
Well, we do run spiffs every quarter. I mean, we have our main spiff is kind of like a fast start spiff because if you think about pipeline, and this is probably true for most companies, you want to have your pipeline coming in as early as possible so your sellers have longer period of time to close it. So we really would prefer that the BDRs get in as much pipeline as possible. So month one, month two, and then maybe a little bit less in month three. And so we try to do a fast start spiff. And that's the main thing. We do run some mini contests. Like each manager can run something smaller within their team. Like they can say, whatever the highest engagement rate on a sequence or they can make up a golf associated one or an NBA associated one. They can kind of make up their own contest, which is more like, gift card type of things. But the bigger thing is more for getting the linearity that we're looking for in their production.
What do you think the coolest spiff your team has ever done was? I'm just curious.
Ooh. Well, this isn't current, but a really long time ago, and it kind of sounds silly, but we had one manager at a company, and literally she would bring in silly things like boxes of cereal, boxes, things of candy, and just have a really, really small contest. But it was more about the contest and the energy around it. And this was pre-pandemic, so everybody was in the office, so you can kind of hear the loudness of it, like trying to win these the small things. That was actually probably before Amazon gift cards existed. So it's dating how long ago it was. But she just made it really fun. So I think it was more the fun element than having this grandiose prize. It was more about getting the competitive juices flowing.
I
That's pretty
think
cool.
that's also a good thing to point out that, and going back to what makes kind of a good sales manager, is one that's able to make sales specifically fun, right? Because a lot of times when we think of
Mhm.
sales, we think of individual contributors, lone wolves, everyone competing against each other to make President's Club. But I think a good sales manager can really foster that team oriented vibe on a sales team. And again, I think
Mhm.
back to Stan, the boss that I mentioned earlier, and he did the same thing where he would pair us up in groups and we did like team oriented spiffs, or there was, all these videos that we had to make in response to each other, right? It was very team oriented effort, which I think made sales, which sometimes can be very stressful and a bit of a roller coaster ride, a lot of fun, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think creativity is really important for contests. It's really important to be as creative as possible, and that does make it a lot more fun. And especially before, this is also pre-gamification platforms, so you had to be really creative then, right? It was all stuff that you were bringing in yourself.
I actually don't like those gamification platforms. Sorry to anybody
Hot
listening
take.
who
Yeah,
works
it's
for
it's
one.
hard to
Hot take,
justify
not a
those. It's
fan.
the real nice to have, but it's very hard to do a business case for that.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about how hard it would be to sell that to somebody. I just, as an end user, don't love them. So
So why don't you love them? I'm
So,
curious.
my experience is somewhat limited. I've only used one officially, but it was so annoying. It was pinging me all the time. It was
Mm.
trying to like gamify everything. So like everything I did, it would like do a little ping, and then you had points that you accumulated and then you used them to buy the stuff, and then it was really annoying to actually redeem the points too. So it was almost to a point where I did not care. I actually ended up winning something on accident because it was integrated into like other things I was using, right? So I won because I did my job, which I think is the point, right? Like you should be doing your job. But to me it was just an extra thing I had to log into, and it took me out of my workflow, and I would rather make the commission from closing a deal than win a $100 Amazon gift card
Yeah.
personally.
Bad user experience.
so of the 300 BDRs that are underneath you right now, what are you seeing among the top performers? What are they doing to differentiate themselves from the other BDRs to make them successful?
Well, actually, I think it comes back to what we are just talking about for managers and contests. A lot of it's creativity, right? Because yes, we have now with sales law, we have the governance to say, okay, you only get access to these sequences and content. Like this is it, and
Mhm.
they can't create their own. So it's really locked down. But they can be very creative on calls, right? If you leave a really good voicemail that gets somebody, maybe they don't call you back, but they respond to your email, that's creativity. We do like the emails, it's not a whole automated sequence, right? You can personalize. So they need to personalize the right amount with the right information to get a prospect to engage. So those are also people that are doing well. And there are people who do better or do well on social media in terms of getting more engagement. So I think each person has their own strengths, but those are the three areas that I see the top performers working on, and providing the highest quality, what we call it something else, but a sales qualified lead is the industry term. For those, the highest, whoever has the highest close rate, right? Even though they don't control the closing, those are the best quality typically. And so I think that's a huge differentiator. They need to pay attention to it, even though they're not following it through, but they need to make sure that what they're passing is high quality. Because we do look at close rates, even though that's not a compensation metric, it's still a KPI.
I think that's really interesting because a lot of teams are compensating on volume of meetings set or volume of things coming through from a BDR team. And I've heard a lot of sales leaders that have said they struggle to incentivize the SDR/BDR outbound team to bring in the qualified things that are actually closing. Is there something you're doing to make them care? Or
Well, I mean, so
is
we
it
do compensate. It is meetings and it is, but the meetings have to be, but there's meetings, but then
Mhm.
for quality control, they have to be accepted. So the close one is just a metric that we're applying to make sure that, we are providing quality. I mean, we do a lot of recognition, of course, on a quarterly basis, not only within our team, but also within the entire sales organization. So if you want to be recognized, it's not, hey, I just got the most meetings and the most accepted meetings. We're also looking at, did you kind of do your core role, which is somewhat activity based, but the results of the activity, the outcomes of the activities, and also what was the close rate. So it's not if somebody's 300%, but their close rate's really awful, they're not going to be the one who gets recognized. It might be somebody at 120% who has a much higher close rate that's going to be recognized on the, within the company because that it's more the whole package versus just a very, very narrowly focused element of what they're doing.
I like that. Recognition matters
I think it does, especially in
Yeah.
sales. I mean, that's kind of, I think people go into sales to compete, to win, and to get recognized. So
and make
it
money.
does help.
And
And the
make
ones that
money.
are recognized, what I told him in one of the meetings we had recently, I was like, okay, sometimes people show up over and over again. So like we start to remember their names, right? In a positive context. If you're showing up in a bad context, we'll remember your name too, but may not be such a good scenario. And those are the people who are going to be the most desirable people to get promoted into an AE role.
That's awesome.
100%. So, spicy question. Do you think cold calling is dead or not? I know we love to argue about this question in the sales industry.
I don't think cold calling is dead, but you can't. It's not about spray and pray. It's not about just winging it, right? You have to you have to have a strategy for what you're doing and what you're going after. A significant number of our meetings still come from outbound cold calling, but it's not just cold calling, right? We're going to warm it up with a very personalized email. Then we're going to call them. We're going to give them, guidance on the core messaging. It's not like they're reading the voicemail, but hey, here's the messaging that Cloudflare uses for different solution areas. And then hopefully they have something creative to say. So it's not just cold calling. It's well thought out and prescriptive cold calling. Phone still works. With phone, you have 4x higher response rate. That's kind of the metric. So if you're, some companies are not going to respond to marketing outreach. So you're going to have to call them, but it can't be really cold.
I think,
Warm
of
them
course,
up.
it also depends on the industry who you're calling, right? Do they live by taking phone calls or are they in the community space where no one has a phone anymore, right? It also depends on
Yep.
that. And I also think there are no absolutes in sales, right? There's always an exception. What works for one salesperson is not going to work for another. So I always say, like, nothing's ever truly dead or truly the way to do one thing.
I agree
Also, it
with you.
depends on who
Yeah.
you're
And
calling.
again, it goes back to the creativity thing. And it's almost that, like people are getting so much email now. Maybe they would rather have a phone call.
Yeah.
Who knows? Or text.
I think honestly, creativity is probably the number one important thing a salesperson can have.
Yes. You got to get your foot in the door. And that is where you need the creativity and even structuring deals. You need creativity for that.
100%. So, do we want to switch gears a little bit and ask some more women in revenue focused questions before we run out of time?
Yeah, we need to find out what gift of wisdom Lori Harmon would grant our listeners, especially knowing that probably most of them are women in the revenue space.
Wow. Okay. Wisdom. Well, one, ask for what you want. We talked about that, right? Like plant the seed. I think people need to be fearless, right? Don't be afraid to take maybe that risky role or take on that project or ask for what you want. That's some of that, does require overcoming or having some amount of courage. So I think that those are two important things. And I think you need to learn the language of business. When you're talking to more senior people or executives, you need to talk in their language, not maybe your language. So they're going to be concerned about business outcomes, customer satisfaction, profitability, revenue. They're not really concerned about the number of calls people are making, right? Even though that might be a path to get to an outcome, they're concerned about business outcomes. So make sure you can talk in the language of the executives that you're dealing with, whether you're selling to them or whether you're working with them or presenting to them in or outside of your company. Really make sure you understand how to talk in their language. I think those are probably three things, just because three is a good number.
I love that. And I think that that last one is different than what we've heard from other guests. The business language is a really good call out. If you want to
Mhm.
be in the room with people at that level, you have to be able to speak their language. So
Yeah.
that's a really good little nugget.
So to hone in on that question a little bit more, I'm asking like talking to a 12-year-old, right? Like how would a person learn language of the executives that they're working with? Is it simply by observing them and see how they speak, or is there a more practical way that they can literally just look this up and learn it?
Well, I think, yes, because everybody's going to talk a little bit different. So learning or listening to what your executives say on all hands or things like that are really important. There are certainly books out there that talk about on that. And I don't have it off the top of my head, but I'm happy to send it to you after this if you want to publish it. There's one really good book. I think it's by Susan Colitano. She's also on LinkedIn. She's like a leadership coach. And I mean, depending on your company or if you want to go outside, there are obviously leadership and management classes you can attend to find out that. So those second two take a little bit longer, but reading a book doesn't take that long. You might take a while to get into or attend a class, but I think those are three ways you can learn, how to have those conversations.
100%. Do you want to get into the would you rather questions that we're
Yes.
wrapping
I
up
think
on time?
I
Oh,
think we
these will
should get
all
to the
be
fun part.
surprises.
Yes.
Yes.
So Lori, we wrap up every single episode with a round of rapid fire would you rather revenue questions. You can explain your answers or you can simply just answer the question. It's up to you, but they are a little bit fun, they're a little bit quirky. So are you ready for them?
I'm ready.
All right, first question. Would you rather have a team that's never allowed to use a CRM ever again or never allowed to use a tool like SalesLoft?
Well, if those are my only two choices, I guess I'd rather have them not use SalesLoft because I don't know. The CRM is like the source of truth for everything. If it's not in the CRM, it never happened. And okay, I was selling before sales engagement existed, so I had to settle those tasks manually. It can be done.
It can be. It might
It
not
can
be
be
fun,
done.
but it can.
It may not be fun. You may not get it right, but it can be done. But no CRM, that's really hard. I don't think that can
That
be
would be
done.
difficult.
Yeah.
That would definitely be difficult.
Yes.
Second question. Would you rather manage a large team of junior level people or a small team of very experienced sellers?
I guess I better say what I'm doing now. Manage a large team of less experienced people. I mean, everybody here most BDRs are early in career, which is great because then you get to do a lot of coaching and mentoring. And I just think having a large team is just fun.
I don't know if I could manage a team of 300. I think that's
Yeah, that's a
very
lot.
impressive that that's what you're doing, but good choice.
You can do it when you're ready.
When I'm ready. Would you rather build an outbound process from scratch with limited sales tooling or have to take over a poorly executed inbound process but have lots of tooling at your disposal?
Think about that one. I know it's supposed to be rapid fire, but
It's
I
all
don't know. I
good.
guess I'll take the inbound route. I'll take the inbound route because it's probably easy to repackage and recraft that, and you can always remove tools that you have. You don't have to use them all.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
Would you rather have a fully automated sales process where every single step is taken care of by AI and is perfect? Or would you rather maintain a traditional sales approach that emphasizes personal relationships and human touch?
Well,
But
I
they're
don't think
manual.
AI can do it. I don't think I mean, maybe one day, but today they can't. So, and only people today can build relationships. I mean, I know they have chatbots and stuff that buyers think are people, but it gets to a point where the chatbot can't answer. So I go for the relationship. That is our added value in sales.
And last question. Would you rather have a CRM that randomly replaces all customer prospect names with celebrity names or an email system that will autocomplete your sentences with cheesy sales slogans?
Oh, I'd rather have the second because you can always edit the email. I don't want the prospect's names to be wrong. It's hard to contact a
maybe
prospect if they change their name.
You
Or
don't
maybe
wanna
you
be
want to keep
contacting
all the cheesy sales slogans, right?
You
With
might.
their-
Maybe
That's-
it's funny. Maybe that's part of the creativity, right?
Or you could just start referring to some customers as Brad Pitt and Jennifer
I
Aniston.
was
don't
thinking
know.
Brad Pitt too. Why was that the celebrity my head thought of too? That's funny.
Well,
Just
whoever
work
you're
with.
talking to. Well, they may like it.
That's
That's
true.
true.
That's true. Well, that's it for the Would You Rather questions. Lori, thank you so much for joining us and talking about all things sales management and business development. We really appreciate your thoughts and your insight and love that you're here.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for
So
well
as
thought
a
out questions and a great conversation.
Yes. As a wrap up, I just want to remind all our listeners the entire purpose of our podcast is to elevate the voices of women in revenue. And there's no better person to talk about sales leadership and how to get there and how to do business development than Lori. So thank you for being our guest and sharing your word of wisdom. If you're listening to this, you can follow Lori on LinkedIn. If you're on Twitter, they can probably follow you there too.
Yep.
Looking for Lori Harmon. Okay, good. For incredible content on sales and business development. And if you'd like to listen to Lori's song, I Won't Back Down by Tom Petty, you can find our playlist on Spotify by searching for Ashley and Katrina's Infinite Revenue playlist. It will be there with all of the other songs that have been picked by our guests. It's pretty awesome. So I hope you give it a listen. We'll see you all next time and keep supporting each other out there, ladies.
I'm going to Spotify right now. Get your playlist.
Yes,
Love
Thank
it's a
you.
good one.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ashley and Katrina's Infinite Revenue Playlist. This show is powered by Comsor, the go-to-network company. Comsor is the complete suite of tools for teams looking to grow, activate, and engage their networks. If you enjoyed the learnings and banter in this episode, there's more where this came from. Follow Ashley and Katrina's Infinite Revenue Playlist wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. See you next time.